I didn't cry when the city disappeared behind us. I thought I would. I had imagined tears at the edge of town, some dramatic moment where grief finally caught up with me. But instead, there was just a quiet heaviness that settled into my chest, like it had been waiting its turn. Isaiah sat in the passenger seat, one knee pulled up, headphones on, but not playing anything. He hadn't said much since we left. 15-year-olds rarely narrate their feelings. They absorb them, quietly, the way I used to. The highway narrowed as we crossed into familiar territory. Trees thickened. Cell service dipped. The world slowed down in ways I used to resent. Now, it felt like an accusation. I had left this town almost 20 years earlier with a scholarship, a suitcase, and certainty. I told myself I was never coming back, that leaving meant winning. Funny how life reframes things. The welcome sign leaned the same way it always had, paint faded, bolts rusted. I remembered passing it once with my ex-husband beside me, newly married, windows down, convinced I was only visiting. I hadn't known then that love could slowly turn into something that felt like permission instead of partnership. Isaiah glanced out the window as we turned onto Mama's street. "This is it?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "This is home." He nodded, thoughtful, like he was filing the word away to decide later if it fit. Mama was already on the porch when we pulled in, hands clasped tight in front of her like she was holding something together. The house hadn't changed. Same pale siding, same wind chimes that sang whenever the breeze passed through. She didn't rush us, didn't ask questions. She just opened her arms, and when I stepped into them, something inside me loosened in a way it hadn't in years. "You look tired," she said softly. I didn't correct her. That night, after Isaiah claimed the spare room and began unpacking like he planned to stay a while, Mama and I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where homework had been done, prayers whispered, and hard truths spoken gently when the world outside felt too sharp. She poured tea. I wrapped my hands around the mug but didn't drink. "He didn't hit you," she said quietly. "No." "He didn't cheat?" "No." She studied my face. "Then it was the kind of hurt people don't know how to name." I nodded. My marriage hadn't ended in shouting or slammed doors. It had ended in constant second guessing, in conversations where my thoughts were rephrased to sound more reasonable, in decisions framed as logic instead of compromise. By the end, I apologized for things I hadn't done and thanked him for things I should have expected. When I finally left, I wasn't broken. I was unsure. That kind of damage doesn't show up on paperwork. The next morning, Isaiah came into the kitchen early, hair still damp from the shower. "Are you okay being here?" he asked. "I am," I said, then paused. "Are you?" He shrugged. "It's different, but you're less tense." That almost undid me. Later that morning, Mama slid a folded piece of paper across the table. "Holloway and Sons reopened," she said. "Daniel Holloway came back home to run it." The name stirred something old and heavy. The factory had once been the town's heartbeat. My father worked there until his back gave out. When it closed, everything else followed. Businesses shuttered, families left. People stopped believing things could last. "I don't want anything complicated," I said. Mama didn't argue. You want dignity and a paycheck. By afternoon, I stood outside the brick building, nerves buzzing, like I was about to confess something instead of apply for a job. Fresh paint framed the windows, but the building still carried the weight of history. Inside, the air smelled like sawdust and effort. When Daniel Holloway stood to greet me, the first thing I noticed wasn't his appearance. It was his stillness. No rush, no performance. He listened, really listened. He asked about my experience, my skills, my ideas, not my marriage, not why I'd returned. When I finished speaking, he said, "This place needs someone who knows how to rebuild systems, not just manage them. No flattery, no assumptions, just respect." As I walked back to my car, job offer in hand, something unfamiliar stirred in my chest. Not hope, possibility. And I didn't know yet how dangerous that could be. If this story feels familiar, if you've ever had to start over somewhere you never planned to return, make sure you subscribe. Stories like this continue right here. The job settled into my life more easily than I expected. At first, I treated it like a temporary shelter, somewhere dry to stand while I figured out what came next. I arrived early, left on time, and kept my head down. I didn't decorate my desk, didn't personalize anything. I told myself not to get comfortable. Comfort has a way of making you careless. Daniel noticed things quietly. He noticed that I rewrote old procedures instead of complaining about them, that I stayed late without being asked, that I brought my lunch every day and never took the last cup of coffee. He never made a show of appreciation. He just trusted me with more responsibility. Trust felt unfamiliar. The factory came alive slowly. Machines hummed again. Orders picked up. The staff began to relax. Laughter creeping back into conversations that at once felt tense and temporary. Some evenings, Daniel and I were the last ones left. The first time it happened, I was embarrassed, packing my bag quickly like I'd done something wrong. "You don't have to rush," he said. "I stay late most nights." I nodded, unsure what to say. That became our quiet routine. He worked in his office with the door open. I finished paperwork at my desk. Sometimes the only sound between us was the soft buzz of fluorescent lights and the low hum of machines settling for the night. One evening, as I stood to leave, he looked up and asked, "How's your son adjusting?" The question caught me off guard. "He's better than I expected," I said. "Basketball helps." Daniel smiled faintly. "He has good footwork. I watched him shoot outside yesterday." My heart skipped. "You noticed?" "He reminds me of myself at that age," he said. Quiet, observant. I swallowed. No one had paid attention to Isaiah like that in a long time. The next afternoon, Isaiah stopped by the factory after practice. His hair was damp with sweat, his gym bag slung over one shoulder. Daniel stepped out of his office. "You must be Isaiah." Isaiah straightened instinctively. "Yes, sir." Daniel laughed softly. "You don't have to sir me. I'm Daniel." They talked about basketball for 10 minutes. I watched from my desk, something warm and dangerous blooming in my chest. That night, Isaiah said, "He's cool." I nodded. "He's my boss." Isaiah shrugged. "Still cool." I reminded myself that it meant nothing, but the moments kept coming. A morning when Daniel noticed I hadn't eaten and slid a granola bar across my desk without comment. A meeting where he backed my suggestion without hesitation. The way he waited for me to finish speaking, even when others didn't. None of it crossed the line. That was the problem. One evening, after a long day of inventory and supplier calls, the rain came down hard. I stood under the awning, waiting for it to ease. "You'll be here all night," Daniel said, grabbing his keys. "I can give you a ride." "I don't want to inconvenience." "You won't," he said simply. The truck ride was quiet at first. Rain tapped against the windshield like punctuation. "Why'd you really come back?" I asked, surprising myself. He hesitated, then said, "My father built this place with his hands. When it closed, it felt like a failure I inherited." I nodded. "Some failures don't belong to us, but we carry them anyway." He glanced at me then, something shifting in his expression. "I don't think you're someone who gives up," he said. The words stayed with me long after I stepped out of the truck. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest tight. This was the danger. Not attraction, safety. Because safety made you imagine staying. I began drawing boundaries in my head. No personal conversations, no late nights alone, no blurred lines. And then came the night everything unraveled. I had forgotten my notebook in the conference room and went back to grab it. Voices drifted through the partially closed door. "She's good," a man said, "but are you sure this won't complicate things?" My steps slowed. "I didn't plan for this," Daniel replied, his voice low. My stomach dropped. "You know how it looks," the man continued. "Single mom, working closely with you." Silence. Then Daniel said, "I'll handle it." My heart thudded painfully in my chest. That was all I needed to hear, because I had heard those words before. "We'll see. Let's be careful. This is getting complicated." I didn't stay for context. I didn't wait for an explanation. I went home and packed fear into a resignation letter. By morning, the decision felt inevitable. When Daniel read it, his confusion was real. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "I do," I replied, even though my hands were shaking. "I can't afford mistakes," I said. "Not at work, not in my life." His voice softened. "You think leaving prevents them?" I didn't answer. I walked out because staying felt too much like hoping. If you've ever walked away because staying felt too risky, subscribe. Her next choice will matter. The morning after I quit, the house felt too quiet. Not peaceful, just hollow. The kind of quiet that echoes back every thought you're trying not to think. I stood at the kitchen sink long after the coffee finished brewing, staring out at the yard where Isaiah used to play when he was small. Back then, silence meant safety. Now it felt like something unfinished was pressing against me, waiting to be acknowledged. Isaiah came in, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and stopped when he saw me still in my robe. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said too quickly. He opened the fridge, grabbed the milk, then paused. "You didn't go to work." "I took the day off." He turned slowly. "You don't take days off." I didn't answer. He poured his cereal and sat down across from me, studying my face the way he used to when he was little and trying to decide if a scraped knee needed tears or toughness. "You quit," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. I nodded. He looked down at his bowl, then back up. "Did someone say something to you?" "No." "Did you say something to someone?" I hesitated. I heard something I wasn't supposed to. He considered that. Did you ask what it meant? The question landed harder than anything else had. No, I admitted. Isaiah leaned back in his chair. That sounds like you. I felt my throat tighten. What does that mean? It means you leave before people can explain, he said gently. You always have. That night, after Isaiah went to his room, Mama joined me on the porch. She didn't bring tea this time, just herself. Are you running or protecting? She asked. I stared out at the yard. Is there a difference? There is when running keeps you lonely. I told her what I'd heard, the words, the tone, the way my chest had closed before my mind could catch up. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, Baby, fear is loud. Wisdom waits. I slept poorly again. Dreams came in fragments. Not Daniel, my ex. The way he used to say, I'm just trying to help you be better. The way decisions were framed as concern instead of control. The way I learned to shrink without realizing I was doing it. By morning, my chest felt bruised. 3 days passed. Then Daniel showed up. He didn't knock, just stood at the end of the driveway, hands in his coat pockets, waiting like he wasn't sure he had the right to step any closer. Mama saw him first. She gave me a look that said, This part is yours, and quietly went inside. I stepped onto the porch. I didn't want to intrude, he said, but I couldn't let this end in silence. I folded my arms, more for steadiness than defense. I shouldn't have overheard that conversation. You should have heard the rest, he replied. I swallowed. That conversation wasn't about whether to keep you, he said carefully. It was about whether I could manage my feelings without compromising your safety or my responsibilities. I stared at him, stunned. I told them I'd handle it, he continued. That meant boundaries, not dismissal. My breath became shaky. I've been someone's liability before. He nodded. I know. That surprised me. You don't act like someone who doubts herself, he added, but you move like someone who's been taught not to trust her footing. Tears slid down before I could stop them. I don't disappear into relationships anymore, I said. I don't lose myself trying to be agreeable or grateful or easy to manage. I wouldn't want you to, he said immediately. That's not love. That's erosion. The word hit home. I didn't come back to this town to fall for anyone, he said. I came back to rebuild something broken. I didn't expect that to include myself. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt earned. I need time, I said finally. He nodded. Take it. I'll still be here. No pressure, no guilt, just presence. I returned to work the following week. The building felt different, but not because of him, because of me. I spoke up in meetings without apologizing first. I corrected mistakes without shrinking afterward. I trusted my instincts again. Daniel never crossed a line, never rushed, never assumed. We had coffee, took walks after work. We talked about the town, our parents, Isaiah's games, the weight of responsibility, and the quiet joy of watching things come back to life. One evening, sitting on the hood of his truck, beneath the old oak tree with the lightning scar, he said, I don't want rescue. I want partnership. I smiled softly. So do I. Isaiah noticed the change before I said anything. You don't look tired like before, he said one night. I feel steadier, I replied. Months later, when the factory officially stabilized and the town gathered for the ribbon cutting, I stood beside Isaiah and Mama and watched Daniel speak, not as a savior, as a steward. And something settled deep inside me. Coming back home hadn't been a failure. It had been recalibrated. I didn't lose myself here. I found the version of me that knew the difference between fear and wisdom. And this time, I stayed.